Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. So folks have been asking me to do videos around painting and building my Space Marines. Now look friends, I appreciate all of the kind words, the encouragement, so on and so forth. I don't know if I am good enough to give instructions just yet because I am a beginner when it comes to painting and building Warhammer armies, but I have heard you. Awa has heard you, and I will at least give you an idea of my process. So, this isn't instructions, this is just how I work. So, if you've been with me in real time, you will know that I recently competed in my first Warhammer 30K Horus Heresy event. It was a day of traitors versus legionaries, and traitors took the day. I competed as a Chaos Emperor's Children, and that is the army that I'm working on here. So we're going back in time a little bit to see how it all began. So inside of your Horus Heresy box, you get enough pieces to build 2 armies, plus 1 Spartan tank and a Dreadnought. There are 10 Terminators and then 40 Space Marines. All 10 of my Terminators went to the Emperor's Children. Reason being is I have another box of Terminators that I can build for my Loyalist army hanging out. So I didn't need to devote all of those to another army. So what you see here is actual building. And I like to do things in real time when it comes to this, just so people get an idea of, well, the tedium that comes with this type of hobby. You have to enjoy the tedium to do this, to get to the end result of your painted army. There's a lot of extra that goes into it. So you'll see that they're already primed and base coated. I intentionally base coated them in Fulgrim pink because I wanted that pink to really be the outline color of everything once I laid on several layers of other washes and colors. So what you see me doing here is I've clipped them off the sprue and separated them in my handy dandy little toolbox where I can have all the pieces for a figure cleanly separated. And what I'm going through is doing some pre-gluing of those bits that need to be together, specifically their guns and their pauldrons, which, let me tell you, 'twas a pain. So once I clip them from the sprue, I have to trim off a little bit just to make sure that there's a place for the glue to adhere. I'm using a plastic glue in this case. And actually where you clip them off the sprue, that's close to the joint where they're going to glue together anyway. I have done this the opposite way. So when I built my Word Bearer's kill team, I completely clipped everything from the sprue, then primed it. I did not base coat those. I actually painted every single piece individually. So there was no base coating. Why did I do it that way? Because I felt like it on this army, because I had so many to complete and I was on a deadline because the event was on June 1st. And I started working on this army in mid-April with work and travel and everything else. I wanted to try doing things a little bit differently to see if I could produce a quality of Space Marine that I liked, but also get it done relatively quickly because I still have the other half of this box to put together, which will probably be a fall project. I have so many other things that I want to work on. It was also our wedding anniversary in June. We went and we did the Warhammer event on our anniversary because we are both nerds that way. But one of the gifts my husband got me was a Titan for Heresy. So she kind of really wants to put the Titan together. And I've also got my Titanicus box as well. And then I've also got some more Eldar flyers to put together for Aeronautica. So there's a lot to put together. So what you see here is I'm having to glue the knee joint to the legs as well. So the pre-gluing on these was the bayonet on the gun body. And then one of the pauldrons came in 2 places. That is the big shoulder piece. I had to glue those together. And then each one of these had a leg to glue to it. I glue them together and then I set them upright inside of my little toolbox. And then it's on to the next one. There's my toolbox. So this is how I keep things separated so that none of my pieces get mixed up. So each one of these represents a Space Marine and all of their little bits that go with them. I will say with the Horus Heresy, there were so many weapons add-ons. I highly recommend the app Battle Scribe, especially if you're new. I do have the rule books. I have the rule books for Horus Heresy, but I also have the Legiones Astartes and the Legiones, and I have totally forgotten it now, but the Traitor Legions. I have both of those books. You need the rule books for sure when it comes to the points on your armies and stuff. Battle Scribe is an app that lets you enter in what kind of army army you have. So is it loyalist? Is it traitor? But then also, who is the legion? Is it word bearers? Is it emperor's? I'm sorry. Is it emperor's children? Is it the sons of Horus? Who is it? And then you can go ahead and pick out, what parts of what types of space marines you're using. Are they terminators? Do you have a dreadnought? Do you have tanks? Do you have this, that, and the other? Do you have a Primarch? And then what kind of weapons they have? And it lets you separate that out and get your point totals. And then it gives you the rules for rolling for each of those. I have found Battle Scribe to be invaluable. Hashtag not sponsored. I'm just letting you know what I use. So now you see here, I'm going on to the next Space Marine. Look at this. I am 6'1". So she does not have itty bitty hands. I got skinny fingers, but she's tall. So when I glue this bayonet to this gun, I have to sit here and hold it for at least 20-30 seconds so the glue starts to eat away at the plastic so that it will adhere together. There are many types of glues to go with the different types of plastic, and depending on what you're gluing, if you've got someone to help you or not, that's going to determine what kind of glue you use. I'm using specifically a plastic glue, and what I like about this one is even though I have primed on the sprue, that's what all that little pre-clipping was about. It clipped off a little bit to expose under the paint, but what that allows me to do with this particular type of glue is leave a very tiny dot. This particular glue dries clear. But once it starts eating away, literally it eats away at the plastic and then kind of reforms it, you leave it alone, it's good to go unless somebody breaks it. Unless it falls off a table, it's great. And that's something you've got to be prepared for. So when we went to our Horus Heresy event, I had a great time. Chris, Blake, if y'all are watching, we had a fantastic time. But a couple of my figures, through no fault of theirs, actually, it was my husband. Actually, he was really getting into his game, and he played with my army. He dropped them and a couple of guns rubbed off, but I'll fix it. So that was actually just showing you the snips that I use. I do have Citadel snips. When I first started getting my Citadel paints, which is the Games Workshop brand of paints, it comes with a pair of snips and they're pretty good, but we actually just went ahead and spent the money to get a really, really good pair of snippers. That is what enables me to be able to paint on the sprue and do this. If I did not have this pair of snips that clips so clean and so precise, I probably couldn't have gotten away with this. So tools are everything. But remember, on this channel, we never, ever look down on folks because they aren't where we are in our hobby. I am new into the painting side of Warhammer. I've been reading the books since I was a teenager. I absolutely love the novels, but I wasn't successful in building an army back then. The people that I was getting into the hobby with at the time, they weren't nice. Let's just say that. They were the kind of folks that if you weren't all in and perfect at the time, then they didn't want you in their group. And where I'm from Nashville, there wasn't a big community that I was aware of at the time. So I didn't have other people to keep interested with. So I just stuck to the novels. I didn't know how to paint. I didn't realize that when you painted an army that you had to put them together. You got to warn people about that when they're new in the hobby. When I was 17, I wasn't looking to build a whole bunch of little figures. I also didn't know about priming or base coating or needing 500 different brushes. I painted things as a kid, but they were usually pre-made ceramic models. I didn't do anything this tiny. They're little. These Space Marine bodies are little bitty. But if you enjoy this kind of thing, it's 100% worth it, because when you get to that finished product, that's what matters. So far we've done 2. And now I'm reaching over to get the 3rd. Again, this is just a real-time video of understanding how getting these things put together works. And I think you've got the idea now. So here's what I'm going to do. Since I'm putting together Emperor's Children, why don't I finish out the time of putting these things together with a little bit of reading from one of my Emperor's Children novels? That might be interesting. So let's enjoy the rest of this time of clipping and gluing by hearing from the novel Fulgrim by Graham McNeill. From the Horus Heresy, Visions of Treachery. We are going to be in the middle of Chapter 7. There Will Be Other Oceans. Recovery. The Phoenix. And the Gorgon. The upper embarkation deck had been chosen as the location where the delegation from the Iron Hands would be met, and Julius felt a great excitement seize him at the thought of once again laying his eyes upon Ferrus Manus. Not since the bloody field of Tigris had the Emperor's children fought alongside the 10th Legion, and Julius remembered the cries of triumph and the victory pyres with great pride. He wore an ivory cloak, its edges picked out with scarlet leaves and eagles, and a laurel wreath of gold upon his brow. He carried his helmet under the crook of his arm, as did his brothers who gathered with him to greet Ferrus Manus. Marius stood to his left, his austere features drawn in a somber expression that stood out amongst the excited faces that awaited this reunion of the emperor's sons. Solomon was to the right. He decided he would need to keep an eye on his brother and attempt to lift him from the pit of self-loathing he had dug himself into. In contrast, Gaius Caphan could barely contain his excitement. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, unable to believe his luck at having come through the crash that had so grievously wounded his captain, and then being selected to join this august assembly. Another 4 captains made up the rest of the gathering: Jandor, Tyrion, Antius, and Hellespont. Julius knew Jandor reasonably well, but knew the others only by reputation. Lord Commander Vespasian talked quietly to the Primarch, who stood resplendent in his full battle plate, the golden-winged gorget sweeping up over his shoulder to the level of his high Shishink helmet, the lamellar aventail sweeping down across his shoulders of his gold armor in a glittering cascade. The golden sword Fireblade was belted at the Primarch's waist, and Julius was unaccountably glad to see it at Fulgrim's hip instead of the silver-handled blade he had taken from the Lair Temple. Behind them, the vicious beaked prow of the Firebird watched over the proceedings, the Primarch's assault vessel sporting a fresh coat of paint after her fiery entry into the atmosphere of Laren. Vespasian nodded at whatever Fulgrim said and turned to march backwards to the company of captains, his face set in an expression of quiet amusement. Vespasian was everything Julius could ever desire to be as a warrior: controlled, graceful, and utterly deadly. His golden hair was short and tightly curled, and his features were the very image of everything an Astartes ought to be: regal, angelic, and stern. Julius had fought alongside Vespasian on countless battlefields, and the warriors he commanded would boast of his prowess was equal to the Primarch's. Though all knew that such a boast was made in jest, it served to push his warriors to greater heights of valor and strength to emulate the Lord Commander. Vespasian was also immensely likable, for his incredible abilities as a warrior and commander were tempered by a rare humility that made others warm to him immediately. In the manner of the Emperor's children, warriors who followed Vespasian would take their lead from him in all things. His example served as a model of how they might best achieve perfection through purity of purpose. Vespasian moved down the line of captains, ensuring that everything was in order and that his captains would do the legion honor. He stopped before Gaius Caphan and smiled. "I bet you can't believe your luck, Gaius," said Vespasian. "No, sir," replied Caphan. "You won't let me down, will you?" "No, sir," repeated Caphan. And Vespasian slapped a gauntlet on his shoulder guard. "Good man. I've got my eye on you, Gaius. I expect you to achieve great things in the coming campaign." Caphan beamed with pride as the Lord Commander moved to stand between Julius and Marius. He nodded curtly to the captain of the 3rd and leaned over to whisper to Julius as the red light of the integrity field began to flash. "Are you ready for this?" asked the Lord Commander. I am, replied Julius. Vespasian nodded and said, Good man. At least one of us is. Are you trying to tell me you are not? Asked Julius with a smile. No, grinned Vespasian. But it's not every day we get to stand in the presence of two such beings. I have a hard enough time being around Lord Fulgrim without looking like a slack-jawed mortal. But put two of them in the same room. Julius nodded in understanding. The sheer magnetism of the Primarchs was something that took a great deal of getting used to. The force of their personalities and sheer physical charisma, leaving men who had fought in the darkest of horrors of the galaxy trembling with paralyzing fear. Julius well remembered his first meeting with Fulgrim, an embarrassing encounter where he found he couldn't even remember his own name when it was asked of him. Fulgrim's presence humbled a man with its flawlessness and exposed his every imperfection. But as Fulgrim had said to him after that first meeting, this is the very perfection of man, to find out his own imperfections and eliminate them. You have met the Primarch of the Iron Hands? Asked Julius. I have, yes, said Vespasian. He reminds me of the War Master in many ways. How so? You have not met the War Master, have you? No, said Julius, though I saw him when the Legion marched at Ulanor. Then you'll understand when you do, lad, said Vespasian. Both of them come from worlds that hammer the soul with fire. Their hearts are forged of flint and steel, and the blood of Medusa surges in the Gorgon's veins, molten, unpredictable, and violent. Why do you call Pharasmanus the Gorgon? Vespasian chuckled at the immense form of a heavily modified stormbird ease through the integrity field, its midnight black hull glimmering in wisp of condensation. The engines growled as the craft turned, its increased bulk formed by racks of missiles and extra stowage compartments fitted in the rear. Some say it is a reference to an ancient legend of the Olympian homogeny, said Vespasian. The Gorgon was a beast of such incredible ugliness that its very gaze could turn a man to stone. Julius was outraged at the disrespect such a term and said, And people are allowed to insult the Primarch in this way. Don't fret, lad, said Vespasian. I believe Pharasmanus quite enjoys the name. But in any case, that's not where the name comes from. So where does it come from? It's an old nickname our Primarch gave him many years ago, said Vespasian. Unlike Fulgrim, Pharasmanus has a little time for art, music, or any of the cultural pastimes our Primarch enjoys. It's said that after the two of them met at Mount Neronia, they returned to the imperial palace where Sanguinius had arrived bearing gifts from the emperor. Exquisite statues from the glowing rock of Baal, priceless gemstones, and wondrous artifacts of argonite, opal, and tourmaline. The Lord of the Blood Angels had brought enough to fill a dozen wings of a palace with the greatest wonders imaginable. Julius willed Vespasian to reach the conclusion of his tale as the Iron Hands Stormbird finally touched down on the deck of a heavy clanged landing skid. Of course, Fulgrim was enthralled, finding that another of his brothers shared his love of such incredible beauty. But Pharasmanus was unimpressed and said that such things were a waste of their time when there was a galaxy to win back. I am told that Fulgrim laughed and declared him a terrible Gorgon, saying that if they did not value beauty, then they would never appreciate the stars that they were to win back for their father. Julius smiled at Vespasian's tale, wondering how much of it was true and how much was apocryphal. It certainly suited what he had heard of the Primarch of the Iron Hands. All thought of Gorgons and tales were dispelled when the frontal assault ramp of the Stormboard lowered, and the Primarch of the Iron Hands emerged, followed by a craggy featured warrior and a quartet of Terminators, their armor the color of unpainted iron. I do believe that was a fitting excerpt from Fulgrim as I work on my Emperor's Children. In fact, I think with my next video, where I will be doing a little bit of painting on these, I might read more of this particular chapter. So the reason I picked Chaos Emperor's Children in particular to build an army was, again, because of the lore. I came into Warhammer loving the novels and the lore and the characters, and when I got to Fulgrim in the Horus Heresy, I did not know what to expect. If you know anything of the lore of Warhammer 30 and 40k, Fulgrim's Legion, the Emperor's Children, were the only legion allowed to bear the actual symbol of the Emperor, the Aquila, and they were the only ones called Emperor's Children. They had the name of the Emperor in their legion, which shows a certain level of favoritism. Not even Horus was allowed to bear such a name or the regent of the Emperor in his colors. So that makes Fulgrim kind of special amongst the Primarchs. And when it comes to Fulgrim's fall into chaos, it actually felt more natural than some of the others. You know, when we look at Lorgar fell because he was pushed. Lorgar wanted to worship his father as a god, and his love was rejected by his father. But Fulgrim, on the other hand, was something entirely different. His legion went through great trials to become perfection. Fulgrim's obsession with perfection stemmed from an imperfection, a gene blight that plagued his legion. We talked about that a little bit when we read his section in the Primarchs, when we looked at the Legiones Astartes rulebook and then read about that legion and his fall from grace. Because of that blight, it created a legion where eventually they would mutate, and Fabius Bile, his apothecary, was able to beat down that blight, and then they were able to pursue becoming a perfected Space Marine legion. Fulgrim is obsessed with being perfect in all things, with being beautiful in all things, and that one can be beautiful and tactical at the same time. The two don't have to be separate. And honestly, as a female, I rather like that analogy, that beauty and strength and cunning and wisdom do not have to be separate traits, that they can be mixed together in one form, in one body, to produce a magnificent specimen. And when Fulgrim was turned to chaos, he didn't turn simply to turn against the Emperor, although it became that way when he sought to become Angel Exterminatus. He turned because he saw ways for his perfection to be even further exalted. He was obsessed with cleanliness, basically. I would even see I would even see Fulgrim as an allegory to something like OCD. That obsession with a certain thing, with a certain model, with a certain level of perfection, but greatly exaggerated beyond terms that we understand as humans in the 21st century. He wanted to be the best that he could be, and what Slaanesh offered was honestly a perverted level of perfection, because that's what chaos does. Chaos doesn't just wander into the human realm creating chaos. They have to be invited, and they exploit the cracks in the armor that they see. And the crack in Fulgrim's armor was his over-obsession with becoming perfect. And then that perfection was then perverted by chaos and used to the end that Fulgrim rose to the princehood of a demon, becoming the physical embodiment of the Angel Exterminatus. So that's why I chose them to be the other Chaos Legion that I would build. I will be building two Loyalist Legion. They will be Ultramarines and they will be Salamanders. But I have so many things to build and so many things to put together that you will get lots of videos like this. I'm just trying out new things on the channel. You may have liked this format, you may not have. I think with the next one, I will do a complete voiceover reading from Fulgrim just to accompany the painting. But I also wanted to give a bit of explanation as to what I'm doing and my process and why I chose to put my Space Marines together in this way. Not everyone has a connection to their Legion, and you don't have to. Some people are simply in it for the game. That's perfectly fine. Some people are in it for the game and the lore. That's perfectly fine. Some people are just into the lore. That's fine too. And some people are doing it because someone in their family drugged them into the hobby. And we welcome you. I just always like to remind people that this is supposed to be fun. If we take the fun out of the fun, then it's not fun anymore. So have fun building your army, have fun learning the lore, and have fun getting to know these characters that you are creating. And now I'm into that process of really building a story behind my own little army that I've built, knowing what I know about Warhammer, and I know that there's so much more that I get to read eventually. So I hoped you enjoy this little glimpse into my process, this little bit of reading into the lore. And as always, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you feel like it, share a video here and there. You can also follow me on Instagram and Threads and X, formerly known as Twitter. And with all of those things out of the way, I will see you in the next one.